All right, Ecclesiastes chapter 4. It's almost as if every chapter he has another problem he wants to talk about. And the first problem he wants to talk about tonight is the lack of justice in the world. Let's remind ourselves that throughout the Old Testament, justice is a major issue. What does Joel say? Let justice roll down like water. It's because we're living in a world, they're living in a world without the laws and statutes and enforcements that we have. You know, these are absolute monarchies. The king distributes justice. And the king allocates permission to distribute justice to some men he trusts. But just like now, some of those couldn't be trusted. And when you have someone who sells justice, the Bible often condemns the selling of justice, then justice is not available to whom? Who gets left out? The poor. Mm-hmm. And in this chapter 4, he wants to talk about the problem with justice. And his solution, his diagnosis is that it's a problem of power. When power is used wrongly, justice is not done. And I think most of us would probably agree with that. Mm-hmm. Many of us have worked for somebody who used their power in the wrong way, either to benefit themselves illegally or to hurt someone else who didn't deserve hurting. And you might have been the victim of someone else's abuse of power. Let's look at the text. Ecclesiastes 4. Again I looked and saw all the oppression that was taking place under the sun. I saw the tears of the oppressed, and they have no comforter. Power was on the side of their oppressors, and they have no comforter. And I declared that the dead who had already died are happier than the living who are still alive. But better than both is he who has not yet been, who has not seen the evil that is done under the sun. And I saw that all labor and all achievement springs from man's envy of his neighbor. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. So the imbalance of power is at the root of what's evil. And so Kohelet, the preacher, who, remember in chapters 1 and 2, he says he's the king. We know he cannot be King Solomon, but we just call him Kohelet. Kohelet becomes an advocate for those who are powerless. In the Hebrew, the words for to be comforted, that is in verse 1, they have no comforter. There is a connotation in that in Hebrew where it's protecting others from abuse of power. So there's no one to take their side, to be their advocate. To defend them. So he says, who's going to take their side? Well, certainly not those who have all the power. They're not going to take the side of the powerless. And he says he's powerless to do any more than shed tears. Now remember, there is behind the book of Ecclesiastes the sense that he was the king, but stepped aside to go find himself. He lost the will of the people. As far as we know, Solomon never lost the will of the people. But this king has stepped away from the kingship and to find himself. And put it in modern terms, he's looking for himself. Psychologically. And so he says he's not king. So the only thing he has the power to do is to shed tears. But during his sojourn, during this journey of self-discovery, he has learned this, that death spares the powerless from oppression. So death is the final comforter. What do you make of that?
It also takes away the things that they might enjoy besides the.
Yeah, that's a problem, isn't it?
Not only the bad.
Thank goodness for the New Testament.
Yeah, this guy is not a barrel of laughs at a dinner party. All right.
Sure, it's not Job.
Yeah. He has an awful lot in common with Job.
Mm-hmm.
To say that it's better to be dead than alive, because if you're dead, you're not being oppressed.
Or never be born.
So the best of all possible worlds, Gene says, is that you were never born. And then he comes back, you say, but I still prefer life to death. All right. Anytime, what do they say? Any day above the grass is a good day. If you can still have an opportunity for joy. So in verse 4, he says it's time to go to work. Let's look at the text. I saw that all labor and all achievement springs from man's envy of his neighbor. This too is meaningless. A chasing after the wind. The fool folds his hands and ruins himself. Better one handful with tranquility than 2 handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. So work is not the curse. All right? He's not saying, in fact, all of us would say work itself is not a curse. Meaningless work, unproductive work is the curse. When you're getting things done, that's meaningful work, when you're making a difference. But when work is unproductive, that's when life has no meaning. So he says, work is not a curse, but the reason for the work is where the abuse lies. If you work just to get more stuff, because you are jealous of the stuff that other people have, that's the curse.
The wrong reason.
He says, work that inspires competition and rivalry runs contrary to Leviticus 19, love your neighbor as yourself. So for him, there's no such thing as healthy competition. This guy is no capitalist, all right? To building capital, to get all you can get, acquire all you can acquire. He says that's ridiculous. Because he's already said, last week, he said, if you're just saving it up for somebody else to spend when you die, what good is that? Because he says the driving force behind competition is envy. And envy is demoralizing. What do you make of that? I don't know that any of us work in order to beat somebody else to have more stuff. But I will tell you, in my profession, you will hardly find bigger egos at work. Especially younger ministers when they get together. How many did you have on Sunday? How many did you baptize last year? What's your offering? How big is your building? You wouldn't think that'd be a minister thing, would you?
Mm-mm.
But and I knew some fellows in the seminary who already were planning their climb up the ladder. They were already trying to make the right connections and get to the right professors so they could get the right references, and they would stay at a church 3 years, because that's how you climb the ministry ladder till you get to that big church and all your problems disappear.
Have you decided the jet airplane yet?
Well, oh yeah, and then you get your jet airplane, yeah, or 2 or 3 of them. I gotta tell you, the bigger the church, the more the problems. So, but we all worked with those people, right? We've known those people who would step on anybody to get ahead because they have to win the competition. Tish?
Some of that can be blamed on public attitude in certain large churches. Years and years ago, we did a daddy roll social
So if you're working just to beat everybody else, he says what you're doing is it's a form of oppression.
What good does it do to beat everybody in something like that?
You should enjoy your work.
You can say the same thing about the laity. Some people go to certain churches to get connections in business and things like that.
I certainly, when I was at a large church downtown, I certainly saw there were people who went there so they could make business contacts, and I know that happens at the little round mission church on the hill over here. But but that happens everywhere.
Yeah.
And even in church, there's competition. To be chair of this so I can control. I don't think we play those games around here. Honestly, I don't see us working like that. But here's his point. Competition is one of the roots of oppression.
It's a hard sell in America. It's a very hard sell.
Which this kind of doesn't fly very well in the face of capitalism. We work in order to acquire the bigger house, the bigger car, the newer car, the trophy wife, whatever. There is idolized in American culture. We set these people who have achieved these kinds of, the trophy wife, the private jet, whatever, we set them up above everybody else. Whether they are good people or not, we don't ask sometimes.
And sometimes we ignore when we know they're not.
Yeah, we ignore it.
Well, their actions will show people that they're really like.
Their actions
Not their
do.
words.
Their actions reveal. All of our actions. So verse 6, he has these two proverbs. The fool folds his hands. In other words, the fool says that I'm not going to do anything. And the other side of that is if you acquire too much, all you get is vanity, chasing after the wind, a vapor. So is there a middle ground where your work brings you satisfaction and some creature comforts? Let's face it, we like creature comforts. As I've said, I've grown accustomed to living indoors. We like creature comforts. Is there a happy medium between we work in order to have a nice life versus we work in order to acquire more than anybody else? Or we refuse to work because we're just afraid. We're afraid.
In a Courier this past Sunday, they had the 10 most expensive houses in Louisville. The cheapest one was like 2.5 million. The expensive one was 5 million and something, and had something like 24 bedrooms, 9 bathrooms. That's it.
If you go past our house on Shelbyville Road and you cross the line into Shelby County, there's a house on the right that sold last year for $7 million. 14 bedrooms and 16 bathrooms.
Yeah.
How do they fit their stuff in there?
It's ridiculous.
I'm sure I could fill it in no time at all.
How are they twice the way? Well, they don't need all that house. Is that on Shelbyville Road?
Uh-huh.
It's up on the hill.
Sits on the right. There's a lake in front of it.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
That car, the truck, they're like.
And I think one of the things that makes it so valuable is there's a good bit of land with it. Shelby County land. So there's these two extremes. Idleness is foolish, and working too much just to get stuff is oppressive. So then he says, it's about rest. A small amount of rest is more valuable than more work. Now we're going to come back to that in chapter 9 again. Rest is our redemption from a day of work. So these folks who work 7 days a week and never rest are living oppressive lives, and they really are. Rest is what gives us life balance. Look at verse 7. Again I saw something meaningless under the sun. There was a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother. There was no end to his toil, yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. For whom am I toiling, he asked, and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? This too is meaningless, a miserable business. Relationships are important. And the person who sets aside relationships so they can work have lost perspective. They are foolish. You know anybody like that? Well, you're right, Becky. I thought about it, but it's the Scrooge story. So he says, you're working and you're working and you're working to do what? To give it all to somebody that maybe you don't even know? This guy he's describing has no son to give it to. And then he says, consumed by work is a recipe for foolishness. And it makes you alienated and alone. Now, this is not a commentary on marriage, why you should get married. It is a commentary on friendship and relationship. Develop friendship. Because the person who has no relationships is toiling for nothing. It's just a vapor. If you're working only to make someone else happy, then you throw away your power. You surrender your power. In the same way, toiling only for yourself is oppression. You abandon the pleasure that comes from the fruit of your work. So, in your busyness, take time to nurture friendships. What do you think of that?
Most of the time in my life when I was at work, I wasn't really at work because I enjoyed what I did. There was only a few times with the jobs that I had that I didn't want to go to work.
My dad used to say, the man who loves his work never worked a day in his life.
That's right. You don't consider it work.
And you know, I think we have to say part of that has to be good relationships with people we work with.
Yeah.
That's part of it.
Yeah.
You know, if I were by myself in a single staff church, I believe I'd go stark raving mad. It's my personality, I realize. Because for me, part of the joy of ministry is the people. That's the fun part. Sitting and writing a sermon is the least favorite thing I do every week. It's the being with the people. That's why Wednesday night is my favorite thing I do. Because I love this sitting around a table and talking together. So he says you could be financially rich and morally and relationally bankrupt. So work at including joy into your work life. Is this what you said?
Well, the Christmas story by Charles Dickens is a good example of that. Old Scrooge, he finally woke up.
He had to visit 3 ghosts, and I don't want 3 ghosts to come see me.
I think sometimes people get caught in, maybe they're caught in a young marriage with children. They get a job they get a job because they have to have a job. That, you know, they have bills to pay, they have babies to feed, they never found what they really enjoy. And so that can be.
And so, you know, if you're working to support a family, you use Gerald here as our case study. He's the breadwinner. He's the breadwinner in the family. Megan is stay at home with baby cakes. And if you're working 7 days a week chasing money and not home enjoying your wife and your baby, it's vapor. It's just worthless.
I know one of the things Rob LaFleur has told me, because he has ended up working from home because of COVID. And he said, you know, had I been at GE every day, I would have missed so much of the triplets. But he was kind of a hands-on, he could be up and down between things when they were little. He said, I just treasure that time.
I've heard many people say when I had young children, treasure this time because you'll never get it back.
But it's hard. I was up at Paul's the other day, and there was somebody with 3 little kids, and the dad was, and I said, oh, they're just precious. He said, do you want them? I said, yes, I'll take them with me. But most people do say that they're so busy living life that they don't enjoy those babies.
I remember that.
Yeah.
I remember having little boys and thinking, I am so tired. If they don't stop fighting, I don't know what I'm going to do.
You know, when you mentioned the way kids behave, Bob, some of you may have heard this story, because it is true, that somebody at Indiana University years ago was doing some research on the amount of energy and effort expended in small children. So that they selected 6 of the fittest athletes from the football team, and selected 6 2-year-olds and put them together in a room for a given amount of time. Everything the child did, the athlete that was paired with them had to do the identical thing. The kid jumped up and down the screen, football player jumped up and down the screen. They said by noon of that day, every one of those trained, fit athletes was exhausted, and the kids were going strong. And you don't have any trouble believing that, do you?
Kids were doing what they wanted to.
Yeah, that's it.
The others are doing the task.
But they, yeah, that's
Yeah.
pretty different right there. Plus they expend more energy to get 250 pounds in there than 20.
Look at verse 2. 2 are better than 1. You might have heard this at a wedding. 2 are better than 1 because they have a good return for their work. If one falls down, his friend helps him up. But pity the man who falls and has no one to help him up. And if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm. How can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, 2 can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. So it's a conversation about companionship and partnership. It's always read at, or lots of times read at weddings, but it's not necessarily about marriage. It could be about any kind of friendship. Companionship brings joy and advantage, rescue, warmth, mutual defense. And if 2 friends is good, 3 friends is even better.
And it takes time.
And it takes time. You have to keep investing in that, which is why he says, if you work all the time, you can't be investing in these friendships. So I would say to you, be very intentional about developing friendships, to maintain friendship.
You have to be careful developing close friends with people you work with, too, families, so that it creates problems.
Well, don't sleep with them. That's probably a good, don't do that. But, I think it is good to be friends with people you work with.
Not too chummy, though.
That's right.
That's what my oldest son, Paul, when he was about 4 years old, all he said, when we moved out in Cloverleaf Acres, there in the south end, and all he wanted was a friend.
Oh.
Outside
Out-
the family.
Well, my kids, we never lived in a neighborhood where there were children, ever. They never had neighborhood kids to play with. So I always had, we lived in a neighborhood with lots of kids. But my boys never did. Any of the three of them.
We went to, my first marriage, we went to St. Francis of Rome. There on Clifton and Frankfurt Avenue. And that one time, that was a very, very wealthy church because there's a lot of horse people
Oh, is that right in that neighborhood?
in that neighborhood. And when Paul was born and we started taking him to church, there was not a whole lot of young people in the church at that time because the neighborhood was established with all these big old Victorian houses and things like that. Young people couldn't afford that.
Yeah.
But the older people, when they take Paul, they would pass him around in church while a mass was going.
I like that, raising a kid like that.
Yeah.
All three of our kids went to church very, very early, and we let them be passed around. You know, there was no COVID then, but
Yeah.
Look at verse 13. So he keeps going. He's coming back to the problem of power again. We left it, but we're coming back. Better a poor but wise youth than an old but foolish king, who no longer knows how to take warning. The youth may have come from prison to the kingship, or he may have been born in poverty within his kingdom. I saw that all who lived and walked under the sun followed the youth, the king's successor. There was no end to all the people who were before them, but those who came later were not pleased with the successor. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Contrary to popular wisdom, poverty and youth may be wiser than a king that refuses to listen. Why do you think poverty is a teacher?
Well, for one thing, you learn hopefully not to make the same mistakes generations before you made. By being rich and not counting the money. In other words, poor judgment. Hopefully you learn to develop good judgment if someone has experience.
Sometimes a youth, a teenager, can be wiser than an old person because they don't feel like they have to defend their position. Someone's moving. The choir is at the Methodist church tonight. That's why we don't hear them wandering around here.
It's the ghost of the choir.
The choir ghost is here. So the king who refuses to accept advice is vulnerable to being replaced. He comes back to say the legacy is unimportant. Everybody's going to be replaced. Don't worry about your legacy. Byron Chapman is the mayor of Middletown, and he has a saying that I've adopted. Cemeteries are full of people who were sure the world could not go on without them.
Yeah.
We should know.
Yeah, that's that? He should know, yeah. All right, we've got just about 8 minutes to get through chapter 5. Let's see if we can. Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. So now we're into how do you approach God. Guard your steps. Go near to listen rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools who do not know that they do wrong. When you go to worship God, keep your lips closed. Rather than telling God everything you've done, listen for what God has to say. Do not be quick with your mouth. Do not be hasty in your heart to utter anything before God. God is in heaven and you are on earth. So let your words be few. As a dream comes when there are many cares, so the speech of a fool when there are many words. When you worship God, go to listen. What do you think about that?
Well, growing up in a Catholic church, you never heard anybody talk in church except the pastor.
These Baptists, you can't get them quiet in church.
No, it's not that, it's just, I know they've changed, because I still go to Mass once in a while. And it's a different culture than, I grew up in, and, of course, when you went to school, the nuns were always with that grade at Mass in the morning. And you better not open your mouth, or she'll close it for you.
I heard they were carers in the classroom too.
Yeah.
I've heard stories about those nuns. I never studied
Oh,
with them.
boy, I'll tell you,
Wrap your knuckles with a ruler?
more than that.
More than that.
Sometimes the fiberglass fishing rod too, that got your attention.
Then he says, when you make a vow, do it. Don't procrastinate. Because procrastination demeans God. If you make a vow to God and don't follow through with it, you put it off, even if you intend to follow through with it. But you put it off, you put it off, and you put it off. You are making a mockery of God, who sits in heaven. And here you are just stuck down here on earth. Your mouth is going to get you in trouble. So be careful that you don't just be silent when you go to worship. And if you make a vow, keep it. Then he says, and when people have dreams and visions, let's see, what's it say? Verse 7, much dreaming and many words are meaningless. Therefore, stand in awe of God.
But I like the one part before that. If you don't fulfill it quickly, you're likely to say, "Oh, that was a mistake." As I've had time to think about it, maybe that wasn't the vow I should make.
Do not protest to the temple messenger, to the priest, my vow was a mistake. Why should God be angry at what you say and destroy the work of your hands? Much dreaming and many words. And this much dreaming is, there was a belief in the ancient world that your dreams were telling the future and giving you direction. We don't really think that much anymore like that. He's like, no. Don't let your dreams direct you. Let your actions, let your vow, let God direct you. And then I want to make sure we get through this next section because I think it's really important. If you see the poor oppressed in a district and justice and rights denied, don't be surprised at such things. For one official is eyed by a higher one, and over them both are others higher still. The increase from the land is taken by all. The king himself profits from the fields. Whoever loves money never has money enough. That's a good, you ought to stitch that on a pillow.
What chapter are you in?
I'm chapter 5, verse 10.
10.
Whoever loves money never has money enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with his income. This too is meaningless. As goods increase, so do those who consume them. And what benefit are they to the owner except to feast his eyes on them? The sleep of a laborer is sweet, whether he eats little or much, but the abundance of a rich man permits him no sleep. Why does a rich man not sleep?
Don't worry about somebody taking his money.
Always worry. I have seen a grievous evil under the sun, wealth hoarded to the harm of its owner, or wealth lost through some misfortune, so that when he has a son, there is nothing left for him. Here's a good verse. Naked a man comes from his mother's womb, and as he comes, so he departs.
The Lord giveth, and the Lord taketh away.
You take everything out of this world that you brought into this world. He takes nothing from his labor that he can carry in his hand. As a man, this too is a grievous evil. As a man comes, so he departs. And what does he gain since he toils for the wind? All his days he eats in darkness, with great frustration, affliction, and anger. So, is he saying we should not work? No. What's he saying?
Keep busy.
Keep busy. If you're working just to acquire more stuff,
Yeah.
you're working for the wrong reason. Let's see what he says. Verse 18. Then I realized that it is good and proper for a man to eat and drink, to find satisfaction in his toilsome labor under the sun during the few days God has given him, for this is his lot. Moreover, when God gives any man wealth and possessions and enables him to enjoy them, to accept his lot, and be happy in his work, this is a gift of God. You find work you enjoy, and it provides you some creature comforts, and you can find recreation and companionship and friendship, and not be so driven by your work that you lose all perspective, then it's a gift of God. He seldom reflects on the days of his life because God keeps him occupied with gladness of heart. The person who finds joy in their work and in their relationships and in their rest doesn't sit around and mope about how terrible life is, because God has given him gladness of heart. What do you think of that?
It's true.
Well, I look at work as giving yourself self-esteem.
Yep. That's it. You should feel good about your work. That you find your work meaningful, whatever that work is. Now, as we age, our work changes, right? We don't do the same work we did years ago. As we age, we know we cannot do the same things we did, but that doesn't mean we can't still find things to do that are meaningful to us. And I'm not talking about going out and getting a 9-to-5 job. I'm talking about finding work for our hands to do that gives us joy in our lives.
I can certainly endorse that feeling, because I did not care for teaching too much. It wasn't what I thought it was going to be, like training months most of the time for teaching. But I got my jollies, first of all, when I was a deacon here, for one thing, two things. When I was in the railway museum, and especially some of the men said I could never learn to handle locomotive, I was too flight, women couldn't do it. I did it for 40 years, but I got my joy. Self-esteem, identity, the whole thing. I've been all through
Reward, should be rewarding.
I worked because I had to eat. LG&E wanted to be paid, Jim, and
Well, they do.
They're not.
They like to be paid. LG&E likes to be paid.
Oh, yeah.
That's what
Or there
that's what I
won't
did.
be an LG&E.
So Tish, you never made a penny from your train stuff, did you?
Not a thing. Got a lot of bliss. I got the world's of satisfaction.
There you go. Well, and that's a great example. To find something to do that maybe it's not for money, but it's because it brings enjoyment to your life. It could be gardening, or it could be sewing, or praying. You know, one of the things that we find later in life is that praying for other people becomes so much more meaningful.
But after watching TV, you wonder if you're going to have time to pray for everybody that needs it.
Mel
There
was
you-
on the faculty at U of L in pediatrics, and he was the instructor for the dental students at Cozair. He really enjoyed that. It
To
was
find the
rewarding.
things that you enjoy. All right, it's time to go. Any words?
This 6th verse is something else.
What is it?
There's another serious tragedy I've seen in our world. God gives great wealth and honor to some people and gives them everything they ever want, but then he doesn't give them the health to enjoy it.
All right. Jean has got us started on next week.
Oh, really?
That's chapter 6, right?
Uh-huh.
Chapter.
Oh, I think that.
So
I
chapter
was
6,
thinking
we'll
about
start
that
we'll
the
start
other
there
day.
next week.
But of course, because I can't remember anything, you know. So it's like, what did John D. Rockefeller say about how much was enough? Just a little bit more.
Just a little. Is that what he said?
Or, well, it's attributed to him. I think it was like $1 more, know whether he really said it. And to think of his wealth, he had the net worth of about 1% of the U.S. economy. He owned 90% of all the oil and gas industry of his time. Compared to today's rich guys, Rockefeller makes Bill Gates and Warren Buffett look like punks.
Ha.
Sounds like the History Channel. You ever seen those programs?
Every time I go to the grocery store and I look at the strawberries, I remember that line, and I don't know that I'm getting it right. Even Mr. Vanderbilt can't eat strawberries in winter. But we do. We eat strawberries year round. Well, you freeze them or you get them fresh strawberries. They're not great, but they are fresh strawberries. All right. Remember, Saturday at 6 is the 9/11 commemoration outside. And Sunday worship, Bible study at 9:30 and worship at 11.
Where will we be?
9:45. 9:45.
Next week we'll be down here, won't we?
Next week,
On Wednesday.
no. I'm glad you said that. I think what's going to happen is Bible study and prayer is going to meet in room 101.
Oh, we'll still be.
Tish, that's your old Sunday school class.
Yeah, will that be for the duration?
That's going to be because the choir, this kind of all depends on, because I don't want the choir singing in that small choir room,
No.
that close together. So the only other big space will be Celebration Hall, so they'll have to sing in Celebration Hall. And since we're not doing dinner or anything, next Wednesday night, we will meet up here in room 101. It's where your Sunday school class is meeting now. And that'll be our new meeting spot.
I hate those chairs in Celebration Hall anyhow.
Why, they're terrible chairs.
It's so trouble to get into and getting out now, it's another story.
All right, well, let's pray. Oh God, how grateful I am for these folks that love you and love your Bible and love your church. Help us, oh God, to put our priorities in the appropriate order. We worship you with reverence. We honor our friendships, and we find meaningful work for our hands to do. Bless us, we pray in Christ's name. Amen.